Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cinematic Schematic, the official podcast of thecinematropolis.com, your home to thoughtful conversations on film. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and today we are talking about the rage in my soul. That's right, today we're reviewing 28 years later, the long-awaited, almost like a mythological degree, follow-up to 28 Days Later from the directing-writing duo of Danny Boyle and Alex Garland. So we're going to start things off, as we always do, with an icebreaker question before jumping into a spoiler-free review of the film, where we'll provide a verdict, and then we'll conclude the show with an in-depth spoiler discussion. Now, joining me today, my co-host, an award-winning Oklahoma filmmaker, and I should say, I got to give you the badge of honor of a Dead Center 2025 programming survivor.
I was going to say survivor.
LaRon Chapman. You've survived the film festival apocalypse.
Yes,
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to be on the other side of it. And looking back on it fondly.
Yes.
So yeah.
Well, you guys put on an amazing festival. I know we did a recap episode, and a couple of the other folks on the panel gave you a shout out for some of your great programming. So, but also hats off to you, the entire Dead Center team, programming. I mean, everyone, but the programming team. You guys brought a lot of great films to the festival. So, LaRon.
Yes.
We are in the presence of not one, but two new folks at the table.
Oh, no.
I know. This is exciting. We haven't done this in a while. It's
spreading.
Yeah. I wonder if they're in a rage like I am right now. We're talking about a movie from the UK, Danny Boyle, Alex Garland. I didn't necessarily pick him specifically because of that, but when I was looking at the schedule, I was like, I got to get this guy. He's a newcomer here in Oklahoma City, and I'm like, I got to get him on a show.
Yeah.
What should I do? And then I look up, and I'm looking at the rundown. I'm like, 28 years later, Danny Boyle is one of the most prolific UK directors. So very excited to welcome, from Adam Reviews Movies on TikTok, Adam Kortliff. Adam, welcome.
Hello. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Enjoying Oklahoma City.
Yeah. So what's your favorite part about Oklahoma City so far?
The thunder.
The thunder.
Well, my wife, first and foremost. Then the thunder.
Good answer.
She's like, wait a minute.
But yeah, I've seen you attending a lot of the Thunder games. You picked a great time. I mean, we are usually pretty good, but this year in particular, I mean,
yeah.
I should say.
We have not been involved with it for so long because it's like we haven't come this close again, so I'm excited, and I'm not even like a super sports fanatic. So
we are recording this on the day of the final Game 7. So
yes.
We are either going to look back on this moment fondly or sad
Yes.
by the time it publishes on Wednesday. But Adam, well, hey, welcome to Oklahoma City. Super excited that, it seems like it's been a good fit for you guys, and really excited to welcome you to our little community of film reviewers and filmmakers here. So welcome.
Thank you so much.
LaRon, we got a new guy, and I'm not going to say he's an old guy, but maybe I would rephrase it as a bit of an Oklahoma film critic legend here. He's been around the block a few days. He's one of the founding members of the Oklahoma Film Critics Circle, currently writing for the Oklahoma Gazette and his own website, Cutting to the Chase. Phil Bachrach. Phil, welcome.
Great to be here. Thank you so much. A long-time listener, first-time caller. So,
well, flattered. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being one of the folks to sort of blaze the trail for those of us who are coming as film critics in the next generation. There's a film critic circle. There's these avenues that wouldn't have existed if it weren't for the work of folks like you and a lot of the other founding members. So thank you.
You're very kind.
We've got exciting guests. We've got an exciting movie. LaRon, I can't remember if I mentioned this at the beginning of the year or not, but this has been a movie I've been looking forward to more than most movies this summer.
Mm-hmm.
We have a good choices this summer, but this one in particular was pretty high on my radar. Before we get to that review, though, I want to note, listeners, if you enjoy this show today, or any show rather, you could support us by subscribing on your preferred podcast app. Leave us a rating review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Hit us up on social media, Instagram. I'm trying really hard to recapture the Instagram. I've not been good at posting, but we do a lot of stories. So give us a follow there. I promise if you follow, I'll start posting more actual posts soon to notify you guys when the episodes are live outside of a story. But we have to recover. We lost a lot of ground when Twitter RIP went away. I mean, I just decided to not use it anymore. So we got to reclaim that ground. But yeah, give us a follow there.
It's there, but
not from me.
Yeah.
But yeah, give us a follow on Instagram, of course, facebook.com/thecinematropolis. Okay. This also, LaRon, is an interesting episode because we're talking about zombie movies. Now, this is exciting for me personally. I'm interested what your take here is. I grew up loving zombie movies. George Romero. I mean, I can my hidden talent is I can name the Resident Evil movies in correct order. They're not good, but I just that's not. So I love zombies.
Good party trick.
But somewhere along the way, yeah, that's literally the only time it ever comes. It's not even a trivia night. Those are such deep cuts. No one even asked trivia questions about the Resident Evil movies. I mean, come on. Somewhere along the way, I think I just fell out of love with zombies. I think it was somewhere around the time Walking Dead and Nazi zombies on Call of Duty. It felt like they sort of like took over. They became mainstream in a way that I didn't expect. And it's not. I don't want to be hipster about it because it wasn't the fact that they went mainstream that I sort of lost interest. It was that it went mainstream, but without any of the like context of why zombies are compelling. Like subgenre in terms of exploring political ideas, social ideas, like 28 Days Later. So I just want to beg the question. Firstly, like, are you number one for you, LaRon? It was probably the first time I think we talked about zombies meaningfully on the show.
Yeah,
and almost
Yeah.
10 years of doing this. What's your take on zombies?
Yeah, I think they're an interesting conduit for a lot of different conversations. You mentioned kind of whether we're commenting on a socioeconomic political landscape, if we're talking about anxieties around disease, particularly like the AIDS epidemic in the 80s. I mean, it could be a commentary on that. There's a lot of different ways to kind of look at zombies. And I think as we get deeper into the conversation about this particular movie, there's even more things to talk about what they could be used for in terms of commentary. But yes, huge fan of zombie films. Yes.
Okay. But like, we're talking like recent zombie films?
I feel like, honestly, I feel like this franchise in particular kind of reinvigorated what zombies could be before. I mean, obviously, George Romero created the universe with them, but what they look like in from a modern take in that sense, we've kind of come to a much more visceral, ground with that. So yeah, I think the more modern ones are the ones I'm more gravitated towards. I've seen the old ones and appreciate them, but I think it really was this franchise that made me love like what zombies could be.
Yeah.
Before that, I would say it would be vampire lore that I was more fascinated with, but
Makes sense.
there's a lot more psychological stuff to unpack there. But the zombies kind of function as in a different way, and you have different conversations. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. Very cool. Well, on that note, I'll throw it to you first, Phil. What makes a good zombie movie?
Well, I think to LaRon's point, it is helpful if it's about something at least contextually beyond zombies. I mean, you mentioned vampires, for instance. I mean, there's a great vampires make for a great metaphor for so many different social economic issues, and I think zombies can as well in terms of disease, in terms of mortality, and things on that. So I mean, I would say first of all, just following the tropes, they need to be gory to some extent. There need to be high stakes involved. And, for me, I think they need to be about something other than just zombies. I mean, Dawn of the Dead is probably my favorite zombie movie.
The original Dawn of the Dead?
The original Dawn of the Dead. Although I like the second one too, but the second one is so much to 28 Days Later.
Yeah, right.
But I think they just need to be about something other than just zombies. There's such a fertile world there.
Yeah, I mean, like for the example, like the original Dawn of the Dead was really, it seems to me like commenting on like consumerism of the 80s, was a consumer culture, being trapped in the mall where you're like, hey, I have all the materials, but the world outside is just decaying. It's really character focused, especially the George Romero's I found to be a lot more character focused than sort of generally the direction we've gone towards more long.
Except for this one.
Oh, no, definitely not this one. And 28 days, to be very clear, 28 Days Later also stayed very character focused. Yeah. Adam, what do you think about zombie movies? Do you have anything in particular that you're looking for in a great zombie movie?
Yeah, so I really like the realism. If it's going to be a serious zombie movie, because there is comedy ones that I enjoy, I want to be immersed in that world and feel like I'm in that. So I'm terrified because as a kid, my first introduction to zombies was Michael Jackson's Thriller. I was petrified for years, and it took me longer than I would care to admit to actually sit down and watch 28 Days Later because I was so scared of zombies as a whole. So when I see modern day ones where I'm like, that doesn't seem at all plausible, it takes me out of that world. I can't fully invest. Whereas the 28 days and 28 years later franchise, that is an immersive experience where I can actually see that happening. And that to me is truly terrifying. And that's what I want from a movie like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's sort of like this whole survivalist mentality too. I mean, there's zombies everywhere, but it's also like, what is humanity after the world has ended? What do we become?
And how does society, or particularly from like a governmental standpoint, like how do they respond to it?
Mm-hmm.
And do they, and the indignity that they kind of show human beings, whenever that we have a rampage like that. We saw some of that during COVID, so.
Well, we'll get to it in this movie, but what's interesting about growing up with zombies was it was also theoretical, a pandemic, and we've now lived through one. And it's like, how would we respond? Well, we've seen all this fiction about how it could respond, and we saw how we responded, and it's so even just approaching this genre now, it feels different.
This movie this franchise hits deeper than it ever has because we lived through a global pandemic as a collective. So for sure.
Well, maybe just to give our listeners a little taste of like where our zombie flavors lie. Laron, what are two of your favorite films in the horror subgenre? But you cannot say 28 anything.
Of course. I'm also not going to say Dawn of the Dead because I think it's too much of a. It's just right there.
The original?
The original,
okay,
yeah. Although I love both of those. But I really like one that I don't think gets talked about a lot called The Crazies, which was also a Romero film, but I prefer the remake that came out in 2010.
Is that Timothy Olyphant?
Timothy Olyphant. I think it's Radha Mitchell. That she's in Silent Hill.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one very lean, but also actually one that I found particularly scary. With the zombie franchise. And then I also want to shout out Peter Jackson's For the Other Side of That, Dead Alive, or I think it's called Brain Dead in the UK, maybe. I heard there's two different versions of it. I think in North America it's called Dead Alive, but 1992. Just that one's just ridiculous, but it's like one of the goriest movies I've ever seen, and that's saying a lot because I watch a lot of crazy gory horror movies. So
very true. Yeah. I mean, if Lauren says it's pretty gory,
there's a house full of blood, so it's wild. Yeah.
All right. Well, great picks there. Adam, how about you? What are a couple of your favorite zombie films?
Yeah, so like I said, if it's not realism, I like when it goes the complete opposite direction.
Mm-hmm.
So Shaun of the Dead.
Yes.
Easily my favorite outside of the 28 Years Later franchise. Just fantastic. I can put that on any moment
100%.
and love every single second. And then from an American point of view, Zombieland as well. I love the way that, not the second one, hate the second one. But the original Zombieland, I thought that was so much fun.
Yes.
Woody Harrelson steals the show for me, and just two zombie movies I can throw on and just enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, man, that movie did a great job at all the like quotables. You got to nut up or shut up. The double tap. I think that movie doesn't get enough credit. Like the double tap thing was originated in that movie, if I'm not mistaken. I think people just say it all the time now. Anytime there's a zombie, I mean, frankly, anytime you shoot someone in a movie, it's like double tap.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, great picks, Phil.
Well, I have to say I've never seen the remake to The Crazies or Dead Alive. I need to see both of those.
Oh, yeah.
I love Shaun of the Dead, love Zombieland. I think my favorite is probably, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Train to Busan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very gory, incredibly intense film, owes a lot to 28 Days Later, I feel like. Along the lines of a Zombieland or Shaun of the Dead, I'm also a fan of Return of the Living Dead, which is also a very funny movie and owes a lot, of course, owes everything to the Romero films.
Yeah.
Yeah, Train to Busan's a great pick. That was one of mine. So I'm going to try to pivot a little bit. But super underrated. I never saw, there was a sequel like The Peninsula or something. I never saw. It was it was a follow-up story in the same universe. But Train to Busan's great. That's another one I feel like it's pretty easy to turn on. I mean, it is a little more dramatic. It's not just comedy, but there's a lot of fun set pieces in there, like when they're having to crawl through the train. And yeah, it's a good time. Oh, man. Well, I'll say, you said Train to Busan. I'm going to go, this is kind of a weird one. Planet Terror. Probably not the first thought people think of when they think of zombie movies, but talk about silly, pulpy, dumb stuff. Other than that weird kind of rapey Tarantino scene, I find it to be a quite fun movie.
Just in that movie?
It takes all the tropes about the bad zombie movies and then sort of like, amps it up a lot. And the filters, the Josh Brolin being the creepy husband in that one.
Yeah.
It's a fun time. I haven't, when I was in college, I think I rewatched that movie probably like 10 or 11 times. It's just super fun. If you're going for silly.
The one and only time that I ditched, because I was an A student, honor student, my mom's very proud. The only one time I ditched class was to go with a bunch of my friends to go see Grindhouse, the double feature
Such a great
at
film.
Quail Springs Mall. And it was still to this day, like one of the best, like film going experiences I've had. Like I remember that being just like, and unfortunately it didn't make a lot of money.
Tragically.
It has like a cult following, obviously, but I just,
I remember the box office read it like tanked.
they just tanked. Yeah. But I just remember it being an exhilarating experience. So Planet Terror, good choice.
Planet Terror is a fun time. Yes. Well, and if you can watch it with Death Proof.
Yeah.
Which is not a zombie movie, but it's a fun time. Man, you guys took all the good ones. So, I'll say guilty pleasure. I do like the first Resident Evil. The first two, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, they know what they are, especially the first one. It knows what they are, and it kind of leans into the like made for sci-fi TV, but it was theatrical. It leaned into the silliness. It still stayed true to the roots of horror before they went full action in like most of them. And especially the first one, the CG is not egregiously terrible because there's not as much action. So they play a lot more for like the spooks. They're a lot more self-controlled with
That
the horror.
laser cutter thing is super cool.
Iconic.
Yeah.
It's almost like the laser cutter, when you think about Final Destination with the logs we were talking about.
Yeah.
When I think Resident Evil, I think laser cutter room. Yeah.
Mhm.
But there's all great choices. And I do think the Dawn of the Dead remake, if not necessarily as good as the original, but I think it's probably one of Snyder's best movies.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, listeners, well, what are some of your favorite zombie movies? You can let us know by hitting us up on all those social media channels I mentioned, or you can send us an email at thecinemetropolis@gmail.com. With all of that said, let's get to our spoiler-free review of 28 Years Later.
There were so many dead. Infected and non-infected alike.
That's why our home is so precious.
I feel he's a bit young.
He's ready, Jenny.
7, 6, 11, 5.
Once you walk onto that mainland, there's no rescues.
Moving up and down again. Don't. Look at what's in front of you. Let's go. Count the bullets in the bandoliers.
So according to IMDb, 28 Years Later is described as a group of survivors of the rage virus live in a small island. When one of the group leaves the island on a mission into the mainland, he discovers secrets, wonders, and horrors that have mutated not only the infected, but also the other survivors. Now, as I noted at the top of the show, this is a follow-up to the 2002 Danny Boyle-directed film 28 Days Later, written by Alex Garland. Alex Garland, who's gone on to direct a lot of movies, Annihilation, Ex Machina, co-directed Warfare earlier this year, but has sort of carved out his own path as a successful writer-director in his own right. The original film, this is mostly for the younger listeners, largely considered a classic, responsible for repopularizing the zombie subgenre. In 2002, it was budgeted at $8 million and made $82.8 million, which is pretty crazy. 10x your budget, pretty big deal. The last entry in this franchise was 2007's 28 Weeks Later, directed by, hope I don't butcher it, Giancarlos Fresnadino. Boyle and Garland were not creatively involved in 28 Weeks, though they are listed as executive producers in the credits. This film had a production budget of $60 million, quite a bit more than $8 million.
Yeah.
And if you haven't been following the trades, this is the first film, 28 years later, is the first film in a trilogy. The second film, The Bone Temple, is already shot and in post-production with a planned release date of January 16th of 2026. The second film, however, is not being directed by Danny Boyle, but actually Nia DaCosta, most known for the Candyman sequel, sequel from 2021? Yeah. And also less favorably, The Marvels, although I really don't blame that movie on her. However, The Bone Temple is written by Alex Garland still. And Boyle has said in the interviews, if 28 years later is a financial success, he will return to direct the third and final film of said trilogy. And I just want to put this out there. I know some people are mega spoiler averse, but I think it's good to set the expectation. Cillian Murphy is not in this movie. He is an executive producer. He could potentially, wink, appear in future installments, but he's not in this movie. And the last thing I want to note here is keeping with the spirit of the original, which notably was shot on a consumer-grade camcorder. They brought back the same director of photography, Anthony Dodd Mantle, who this time tried to do a new approach to the same idea by using iPhone 15 Maxes. A ton of them. You've probably seen, a lot of folks have probably seen that photo where he's got like some of the zombies with like captured and shot with like 20 iPhones, which is pretty neat. All of that said, I think before we get to the review, it's worth talking about our relationship specifically to the 28 Days franchise. And Adam, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so it was my first introduction to zombies as a whole. As I said, Michael Jackson's Thriller scared me off it for a long, long time. And given that it was a British-made movie and it is a staple of Britain as a whole, it was my rite of passage, I think, into what zombies are. So I've looked back on it fondly for years and years, ever since the day that I saw it. I can see even just the first shot of Cillian Murphy with Big Ben in the background, and I can liken that to like the first episode of The Walking Dead, very similar. And I can just see so many different things that have been picked from 28 Days Later and see them in follow-up movies and just how much it's impacted the whole Hollywood version of zombie movies. And to see that from my homeland being such a great thing, it's just so close to my heart because it doesn't really happen. British-made movies aren't really that popular. Sometimes for good reason, but this is something that's stuck with me since the day I've seen it. And to see such an interest in a legacy sequel 23 years after the original, it's just amazing.
Yeah. And I think one thing that stuck out to me, even in rewatching it a couple weeks ago, they shot this on a camcorder. This isn't, listeners, they didn't have like the computer technology wasn't what it is today. So they actually got shots of vacated streets of London, which is kind of, I mean, like maybe for listeners, provide context how cool that is. Like,
that's impossible. Like, so my wife watched it for the first time last week and I kept having to pause it to be like, I used to live in these streets. I don't think you understand to have London Bridge completely lifeless. That's insane. That would never happen. It's packed full of hundreds of thousands of tourists every single day. And to just capture such a unique like picture on a consumer grade camcorder, it will never happen again.
Yeah.
And if it does, that'll cost 100 million to make that shot rather than 8 million. And that is just insane.
Yeah.
Very chilling, I imagine, too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just incredible though, because like imagine like getting photos of New York City, actual New York City.
Yeah, I think the one thing that comes to mind is like Vanilla Sky. There's one take where they were able to get Tom Cruise in the middle of Times Square running around, and it's completely empty. And I can't remember, it's like a certain time of day where they're like, we got one shot to get this, and it's an incredible shot if you ever see the movie. But yeah, just near impossible to get things like that accomplished. But
and both Vanilla Sky and 28 Days Later came out like shortly after 9/11.
Yeah.
I remember seeing it in the theater, just finding it so chilling because I mean at that point we had already seen what a huge metropolis can look like deserted.
Absolutely, yeah.
So Phil, what is your relationship with the previous two 28 Days films?
Well, I was in my mid-30s when I saw 28 Days Later, and I remember being blown away by the look of it. I mean, the camcorder, it's kind of garish, but it looks urgent. And to Adam's point earlier, I mean, it just the visuals of this desolate London are pretty amazing. I loved it. I'm less sold on 28 Weeks Later. I liked it. I think it is far inferior to the first one. But
yeah. 28 Weeks is we'll talk about it. It's got a lot of really good ideas. I mean, at least the first act I thought was pretty top notch, and then you get the rest of the movie. LaRon, what is your relationship to these films?
Yeah, so I remember I would have been 12 or 13 when I saw the first one of these, and this is
way
back,
to rub it in,
right? This was back when I think I still remember MTV was doing those out of the theater like first takes, people like, oh my God, it's the scariest movie I've ever seen, and they just kept showing little clips, people screaming in the theater, and they still kind of do that a little bit now today, but it feels less genuine now than I think it was then. And I remember being so amped up to see it because by this point I would have been deep in the horror franchises of all of that era. And I remember seeing this and thinking, zombies had never been scary to me. They'd been kind of an interesting idea, kind of cool in other movies, but this was the first time they were scary to me because they felt real. There was something so, like you mentioned, the way that the film is shot, that early aughts digital photography just feels so textured in a way that it doesn't feel manufactured. You know what I mean? The way that a lot of found footage films do kind of today, where they're trying to capture that feeling. This does feel like some long lost footage that was just found in this particular era, and so it does feel, even when you're looking at these what were then not huge stars, Cillian Murphy, Naomi Campbell, no, not Naomi Campbell, the oh man, Academy Award nominated actress from Moonlight, but Moneypenny and
Harris,
Naomi Harris. Yeah, I was like, I want to get that right. Naomi Campbell is a model. I was like, but I just remember now even looking back at them, not knowing who they were, they just lived in that world. So they do kind of, there's just something, just something tangible about it that, that made it very scary, and the realism of it is just very breathtaking. So yeah. I was a huge fan of that. Weeks rewatched upon just recently in preparation for this movie. I think it holds up better than I thought it did then, but I still think it is a step down. You can kind of tell definitely the direction and the writing is not as strong, as it was in the previous one. Particularly, I think in terms of character development.
Yeah, the character development.
But there is some interesting, very interesting set pieces in it that stand out, that make it worth seeing still in a part of this universe. But I'm a fan of them in general. But I think the first one is kind of an all-timer.
Yeah, all-timer classic for the original for sure. I mean, at least 28 Weeks will have the immortal image in my brain of Harold Perrineau chopping up a bunch of zombies with the helicopter.
Yes.
I don't. It's kind of out of place with the rest of the movie, but you know what? It worked. I definitely remember it. I rewatching 28 Weeks Later, I still like the movie. I think the first act, the setup is so compelling and interesting, and there's a lot of ideas that they're trying to weave together that just don't come together. And I think the problem really lies with the characters are not super well fleshed out. You have a lot of the actors who are doing a lot of heavy lifting, and even they can't quite get it there.
Yeah.
But I still think it's got some really effective sequences, like that the sequence where all the civilians get locked in the basement. Is just super chilling. Does it make sense? I'm not the one who gets paid the big bucks to make military decisions, but it was a cool sequence nonetheless. Also, that movie's mean. When the wife gets killed by the infected husband. Whew.
Oh.
Yeah.
Brutal scene. And I just think, I think we've sort of hit on it, but overall, I would just say, especially for younger listeners or people who maybe are just not super familiar with like the zombie genre, like 2002's 28 Days Later really brought fast zombies into the picture. It brought, I think, a lot of the appeal of the George Romero, hey, I'm going to make this horror movie that's actually about, race in America in the 60s, for example, right? It was a movie sort of exploring post 9/11 survivalism, fighting the war on terror. What is left back home whenever we like sort of like lose our souls to rage and anger. So I think it brings a lot of those ideas in a modern in 2002 context. So here we are 23 years later. Not quite 28, but Danny Boyle, a lot has changed. What do we think of this film 28 years later? I'll start with you, Lauren.
I left this very, just beaming, really. And I think you and I out of the theater were kind of downplaying, like you mentioned, like our love for it, because there was kind of a tempered response, but I don't think it's because people didn't love it. I think we were surprised by what we saw. You know what I mean? Just coming into this, like we were very excited to see it, obviously, and as it being one of our most anticipated movies this summer, but just what we actually got from this was kind of mind-blowing, because it's just not what you expect from technically a third entry in a franchise. Normally they're running out of gas, or they're rehashing old ideas, or just making like a carbon copy of what you've seen before. And we get all the things we loved about those two movies, with also like expanding this universe in a way and showing the potential for even more interesting kind of storytelling and genre bending. There's a lot of different elements in this film that I did not expect it to go into. And so it's still very visceral and alive, but it expands the kind of the mythology of all of this in a way that I found just really fascinating. And I'm so eager to see where the rest of this narrative is going to go. Because I did really think that this was just going to be an insular thing where it's just, here, it's infected more people, and now we're going to have the same kind of, like conversations around it. But now they've opened the door for this franchise to be, to go from very intimate to very vast in terms of the narrative elements that could be included. So
yeah, I think, not tip my hand too much, but and I said this about 28 Weeks Later too, and I still stand by it. What I appreciate about 28 Weeks Later, but especially this movie, is we just live, and maybe it's because I'm just so beat down by the machine of constant sequels, reboots, and everything, where they're playing the hits 9 times out of 10. And it's like, okay, a sequel, it just means that thing we saw, but bigger. Or, like we see if it's a sequel, it just means more of the thing you've already seen, right? And so I really admire the fact that this is a sequel that is still, I think, following a lot of the same ideas in a very different context, of course. But it's also doing it in such a fundamentally different way, stylistically, maybe even narratively, than what we'd saw in the original film. So it's just kind of refreshing to see a sequel that's like, yeah, it's still a sequel, same universe, but we're going in a real different direction. We're not just going to do 28 Days Later, but in a bigger city.
We have real characters here, like real new interesting, like subplots and again, world building too. So,
Adam, what did you think of 28 Years Later?
So the more I've let it marinate, the more I've fallen in love with it. Instantly coming out of the theater, I was mesmerized. I think tonally it's very similar to 28 Days Later, which is what I wanted from this. You can tell it's a Danny Boyle movie. And just the way that he has captured the universe, like you say, it would have been so easy to just make a cash grab because there's so much hype for it, to make just things be outrageous, bigger, better, in quotation marks. But he didn't. He stayed true to himself as a filmmaker and to the roots of 28 Days Later. What made that good is what I think he's really honed in on in 28 Years Later. I really liked the fact that there was 2 stories, but they both felt like they needed to be told. There's so many movies that come out where you've got one half of the movie that's completely tonally different to the second half, and it just doesn't work. Whereas the stories here just felt like they needed to be heard, and I was invested in both sides of the whole journey. And to get to the very end, it's the first time I've seen an ending that is on a cliffhanger where I've been like, that was the perfect ending.
Mm-hmm.
It leaves me wanting more rather than leaving thinking, well, that's just for the money to get people to come next time. It feels like there's more to the story. And like you said, there's an endless universe there that they can now explore. And these 3 movies have led to that. And I think I can't wait to see where they go with it.
Yeah. And we'll get to it, but the major cliffhanger on this one, it's funny. I'm like watching the movie, and I feel, without spoiling, it's a coming of. We'll keep it vague, but there's a coming of age story component for the main character Spike, and you see a moment where you feel like he's becoming air quotes becoming a man sort of thing, and you're like, all right, that's going to be where they smash the credits, and then you have that moment, and then it lingers for like 1 second longer, then it's like, whoa.
Yeah,
something just happened.
Something just happened.
What's going on? And it's different.
Yeah.
I've warmed on it a little bit myself as I've thought about it, but it was definitely a hard left turn with about 3 minutes of runtime left.
Yeah, it does sound like the 23 years in separation from the last one. Like, why come back to this? Is the question I had.
Yes.
Whenever they were, I'm going to go see it because I love these movies, but there was a question of like what. But I think in that absence of time, so much has happened. Politically, socially, all these things that there's just so much more to mine through. And so I'm glad that they took the time. It's a lesson to a lot of other franchises. You don't have to rush to the next sequel. Like, make a good movie, take the time to flesh it out, because you might come back with like a banger like this, where it's like, you know what I mean? Like, where you're actually going to leave an impact and not just a flash in the pan sort of moment, So yes, I think that time of gestation and marination is really what gave this, such an interesting, fresh feel, and not this warmed over thing that we've already seen.
And you and I have even talked about this with the Scream franchise, for example. It's, the rapid succession of sequels. You're like, well, the whole point of this is sort of to react to horror as it is today. And if you release them too closely together, there's not been enough has happened to the genre for there to be meaningful things to say.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. And retweet, reshare, whatever. It's because you and I talk about this all the time. Anytime they bring back a franchise, the Saw franchise is one of my favorites to be like, I mean, if you're gonna bring, I'm all on board for you guys to do it, but there needs to be a real idea.
Yeah.
It can't just be a cash grab. What is the creative idea that is, justifying the fact that you're resurrecting this thing that people loved 20 years ago? And this one stepped up. Phil, what did you think of 28 years later?
I loved it. Really, everything you guys said, I will echo. I think it helps too, to what you said with regard to doing something different that's not just a cash grab. It helps that it's Danny Boyle and Alex Garland. I mean, they're incredible artists. They're visionary. I was just, I loved it. I was just blown away. It is 2 very distinct stories, but they are connected. Incredibly character driven. The visual look of it is something I hadn't really seen before.
Yeah.
I loved the soundtrack. I just loved everything about it. More so than I thought I would. I mean, because it wasn't what I thought it would be.
Yeah. And that's the biggest takeaway. It's like, it's not what you think it was going to be. Even from the trailers, like, I just thought it was just going to be, okay, a beefier version of what we've seen before, but it's so much more than that. Yeah.
Yeah. So much to unpack.
Yeah. Lots to unpack, especially in the spoiler section. I mean, I think, like, just to kind of put a pin on, my thoughts, I really think my Letterboxd review, Danny Boyle, we are so back. I know, the most overrated phrase ever, but listen, I love Danny Boyle. He's a tremendous filmmaker who doesn't make movies very often. And so when he does make something, I'm like, okay, well, I'm there. And the movie he made last was Yesterday, which was a perfectly okay movie.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't love it. And that was 2019. So we haven't had a movie from him in 6 years. So it's really been since Trainspotting 2, which I think was 2017, 2018.
Yeah.
It's been a hot minute since I saw a movie of his that I loved. So just to see him come back and still be just as good, if not better than he's ever been. I mean, between the editing style, the visual storytelling, him and Garland, man, I mean,
Some magic there.
they've got a good
And the sound
collaboration.
design, which I found was the same sound designer for the Zone of Interest, which makes a lot of sense. It's
Yeah.
like it was great. So
Yeah, I mean these guys have a real magic chemistry between the two of them. Where because I haven't loved every Alex Garland directed movie, but I do love him as a director. Just not love every movie, and I have also not loved every Danny Boyle movie. But you get these two guys together, there's just like it's a real special visual feast that you're getting. So. And I just thought, there are two distinct stories happening, and both of them were super compelling. And I'm really curious. Yeah, you guys have already said it, but I really want. I both am so excited to see what happens next, and also like I have no clue where they're going to go with this.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got some rough ideas, but like
right.
it feels like they could do anything really, which is an exciting place to be for a franchise that's 23 years old.
Yeah, because you think they would have written themselves into a corner where it's like, where do we go from here? But it's so interesting just how much they've opened this story up to like potential all of a sudden at the end. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, this is a new entry in the zombie subgenre, and I think we've already all kind of alluded to it. It's doing a lot of different stuff than even 28 Days Later. Phil, what would you say this movie is doing to sort of push the zombie subgenre?
Well, you mentioned it earlier. I mean, it is at heart a coming of age story, which just how character driven it is, how emotional it is. I mean, that's what I was not expecting at all. Even, I mean, 28 Days Later is well drawn, does have well drawn characters. There's the Brendan Gleeson whole subplot with the daughter. This really said, to me, it said a lot about family. It said a lot about, and Adam can extend more on this, on Brexit and isolationism. I think you could certainly argue that America has had something of a rage virus since 2016.
Yep.
Like there's so much involved here contextually that is aside from the horror aspects of it, although it definitely delivers on that too. But I think the coming of age aspect of it really helped make it far different from others of the genre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Laurent?
No, I agree. I think the weaving of, because this is like you say, coming of age. There's a father-son story, like a transition into manhood theme, and then also even an adventure film kind of comes into this. There were moments where I was like, I felt like I was watching an 80s adventure film. When they're going into the woods and kind of exploring things. I found that really a fun avenue into it, and that's what I think I kept taking away from it when I was sitting in it. It was like, I'm not even thinking about the zombies right now. I'm so immersed in the very different flavors of storytelling that they're kind of infusing here. But yeah, I found that basically, like, if you think about it, like I think Phil, you said at the top of the episode, it has to not just be about zombies, because that in and of itself isn't too interesting, or you can't go too far with that. And so they figured that out, that you could tell a story around that and have zombies be a component of it, but not the, you know what I mean? Like the full focus. And so, which allowed us to kind of get more invested into the universe that they're creating and the new characters that they're introducing. So I found those all to be very, very like fresh, elements to infuse into this genre. So,
yeah. Well said. Adam, what's your take on how this sort of contributes to the zombie subgenre?
Yeah, so I think there's been a massive commercialization of zombies as a whole. We've had The Walking Dead, we've now got The Last of Us, World War Z, to a point where it's like, how much more can you do with just zombies everywhere? This has gone back to the roots of 28 Years Later, where it isn't just, as the guys have said, it isn't just about the zombies. It is about humanity trying to survive, and it really helps you buy into it. Whereas things like World War Z, I didn't have that like attachment. It was great spectacle, really cool to watch these crazy zombies tear apart the world, but at the end of it, no emotional moments. Right. I don't think I've even rewatched it since, just because I was like, that was good to watch, but it was just an entertainment ride, like a roller coaster. Whereas this, you're immersed. You can imagine what it'd be like to be facing such adversity and the isolation, and how would you survive? And I think just going back to those roots is so different to what we've seen for the past decade that it's new, it's fresh, and I want to see more.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the character focus, the sort of like commentary on the world as we live in today. There's a few interesting things that stuck out to me. Number one was, and this is in the opening. I think this isn't too much of a spoiler. This is in the opening titles, but essentially, they do retcon 28 weeks later, almost immediately. Like, you know how they made it to Paris? Actually, it's they pushed them back. It's all in the UK. But what that allowed them to do was, and I think that was by far the smart move. If it went global, it just really changes the story fundamentally and what the ideas they're able to explore. So by keeping it on the UK, we have this little bubble that our characters are in. And it's a great setup for a coming of age story for a few different reasons. Number one is this is a kid who hasn't known things like smartphone. But firstly, a kid who didn't even have the internet, it didn't exist. They barely had the internet when things shut down in 2002, right? So even like his dad barely has any sort of context for where the world was heading, with technology. And so you have this like kid who is just, it's almost like borderline fantasy. You know, he lives in this world that's different rules.
Yeah.
But then we get that juxtaposed at a couple moments in the film where, the rest of the world kept going on. So these people who are just living this way are contained in this little bubble that's set like living like almost very primitive
like medieval
lives.
times almost.
Yeah.
They use bow and arrows instead of machine guns. Yeah.
So I just found that really an interesting juxtaposition because it also allowed them to comment lightly on our culture's gone some weird directions, hasn't it?
With the digital age, for sure.
Yeah.
It's kind of added a toxicity to everything. Yes. Yes.
So I thought those little like little tidbits like that I thought were interesting, and I'm really curious how they're if they're going to follow up on that idea in either of the sequels. So that was number one. I think number two was thematically the Ralph Fiennes character. We won't give too much away about him, but there is this idea of embracing death as almost like a beautiful part of life sort of thing. We don't typically get that in zombie movies.
Yeah.
This is a movie that could be super dour, and it does get dour in places, but there is also this like sort of uplifting component to it, like embracing the slow death.
It's really beautiful too.
Yeah.
That scene.
Yeah, there's some good stuff there. But anyway, those are a couple of the things that I stuck out. I'm like, I don't think I've ever seen this in a zombie movie before.
Yeah.
There's some fun, and there's also some of the fun world building stuff. We get the alphas, who are these giant monster zombies. They're like almost evolving to their own form of like tribalism.
You can't tell me that the alpha in this was not Jason Momoa running. Like I won't believe it.
Yeah. No, I will say this. Alex Garland's an Attack on Titan fan, and if you've watched that anime, you can definitely tell from the way he paints the alphas. So we're going to talk about so much more in spoilers, but real quick, for folks who don't want to be spoiled, what letter grade would we give 28 years later? So, of course, referring to, for first timers, the letter grade you would get like on a school assignment: A, B, C, D, F. We skip E for some reason. Pluses and minuses are allowed. So, Phil, I'll start with you.
A.
Solid.
Yeah, solid A.
Love it. Adam?
So out the theater, I had A-, but as I said, I've let it marinate, thought about it more, an A.
An A. All right.
Yeah.
LeBron?
I'm also an A. At this current stage, I know we're very early in the year, but I think this is going to make my top 10 list. Yeah, it's a very, very, very strong entry into this genre of zombie genres in general. I don't think this is like any other genre. I mean, any other zombie movie we've ever seen. Mm-hmm. So I think that's significant and culturally significant. So yeah.
Yeah, also going to go with an A. Man, I'm really tempted to say I'm not quite A+ because I need to see where the sequels go, but it's pretty close.
It's hard to give me an A+. I can't give.
It's so rare.
I can never give a movie an A+ with this close of a proximity to it. The only way I give an A+ is in retrospect when seeing what the movie means to me. I'm like, okay, that's actually an all-timer, like
looking at my list, though, based on what I've seen so far this year, the only movie that I think's beating it out maybe is Sinners.
Sinners.
Yeah, but like outside of that, like it's not even close. Like it's those two movies than everything else.
Yes.
Honestly, yeah. So I'm also going to give it an A because I just think it's freaking fantastic. I really want to see this again on the big screen.
Me too.
And there's so much stuff to watch right now. I'm already backlogged, but I'm like, nah, man, I got to make time to see this one more time on the big screen at least. It feels like it'd probably be a pretty rewarding rewatch as well. We also do this thing where we recommend other media. It could also be films for folks out there. Lawan, what alternate media recommendation would you give folks who are interested in 28 years later?
In terms of zombie films, we talked about it earlier. I do think that Train to Busan is at least slightly, there's a nod to it here at least once in this movie. And I feel like that would be a good rewatch in tandem with this. But weirdly, I'm going to recommend two movies, one by Danny Boyle that I did not expect this movie to remind me of, but it was Millions, which is like a heartfelt, like his sentimental side, about a 9-year-old kid that finds $1 million and decides not to tell his dad that he found it and spend it in a very like giving sort of way. And there's kind of a commentary about the light and dark shades of humanity in it. And I found that interestingly kind of woven into this coming of age story with Spike and his father in this story. And then I'm going to give a nod to 1979 film, The Warriors, about a turf battle between New York City street gangs, which makes sense when you see this movie, and we'll get more into it in spoilers, but there's at least one scene that definitely gave me the Warrior vibes. So,
all right, Warrior. Let's go to you, Phil. What else would you recommend to folks?
The Teletubbies. You got to give up any movie that turns the Teletubbies into a massacre, and that's not much of a spoiler. Well, you mentioned Train to Busan. I'll mention two films that have zero to do with this thematically, but one of the things I loved about this film being shot on iPhone and big bank of iPhones is, it does give you a visual look that I honestly just hadn't seen before. And it reminded me of, I just love when movies are still coming up with new ways to present the visuals and to present visual storytelling. The Nickel Boys, honestly. Nickel Boys and Zone of Interest are two films. You mentioned Zone of Interest. I didn't know it was the same sound designer, but both of those films I also just put in this category of things I had not seen before visually, and thematically very different, but I would recommend both of those.
Well, I think the idea of placing you in the footsteps of those characters in this visual way is very similar in that, in the angle in which they're taking to tell the story, because those could have been told very straightforward. And instead, we're left like, like you're kind of in the skin of these people for a couple hours, and there's something very harrowing about that. And so definitely I can see why those would be good recommendations.
And frankly, more people just need to see Zone of Interest. Yeah, I'm always shocked, even among movie people, I'll drop it and they're like, what was that? Or like, oh yeah, I heard about it, didn't see it. And I'm like, no, this is a must-see essential watch of the decade. Easily. So great recommend. I think that's very fitting. Adam, what else would you recommend?
Yeah, so I went down the route of more British films, British film, and Danny Boyle himself. So for like a real good look at British culture as a whole, Trainspotting is perfect, particularly for Scottish culture. And I know a lot of Americans have got Scottish blood in them. So if they want to see what Edinburgh was like, and still parts of Edinburgh are still like, Trainspotting #1 is perfect. I think I have that at 5 stars. Trainspotting 2 is fantastic. Not quite to the level as Trainspotting 1, but it's Danny Boyle in a nutshell on screen. I think it's the best of his whole filmography. So if people want more Danny Boyle, that's the one to go to.
Trainspotting. There's also like a shocking number of people who haven't seen either of especially the original, but that's an essential, I would say, from just in general, but from the 90s.
Absolutely, yeah.
I saw Shallow Grave for the first time just a few weeks ago.
And
that's an incredible film.
I saw that super, super late, probably within the last 5 years or so. So yeah, and that kind of blew my mind. Yeah.
I still haven't seen Shallow Grave,
will
so I
recommend
have some
it.
homework.
I will
it
recommend it.
sounds
Take care of that.
Yeah, I know, right? No, I'm glad I actually was going to say Train Spotting 2 as well, and I think we're talking about more in spoilers. The thing that I was looking for when I saw that movie when it came out was sort of this like angst and anger. The world's wronged me somehow. It definitely wasn't all that heroin I did when I was younger that maybe put me in this position. You know, there is an idea there that I think he's, approaching a very different way. So I just want to second that because I also don't think a lot of people saw Trainspotting. As few people who have seen Trainspotting 1, fewer people have seen Trainspotting 2, because I remember when that opened here in the U.S., it also like flopped hard, and I was really heartbroken because I was like, Danny Boyle is one of our great directors. So yeah, second that. I do think Steve Jobs is actually pretty good too. I really like the Aaron Sorkin, the way he's able to do some really cool visual tricks while they're monologuing, and the editing choices in that movie, just from a technical perspective, I think showcases what Danny Boyle is able to do as a visual storyteller very well. Not necessarily my favorite of his movies, but it is a movie that I do from time to time. Like, man, that was a cool shot. I'm always thinking that scene where there's like they have like a big long white wall while they're talking, and you see like rocket ships and all this cool stuff. Anyway, really cool stuff. Like that one a lot. And then Sunshine, just because I'm a sci-fi head. And it's a great film. Unfortunately, if you bought it on DVD, I don't know if you heard, it's probably not good anymore because of the Warner Brothers deterioration. But, if you can find yourself a hard copy of Sunshine, guard it with your life.
Oh, man.
All right, listeners. Well, those are our overall spoiler-free thoughts on 28 Years Later. A lot to talk about and unpack here in spoilers. So if you do not want to be spoiled on the film, go ahead and tune out now.
If your eyes drop, they will get the top of you. Food, 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 moving up and down again. There's no discharge in the wall. Try to think of something different. Oh, my God, keep from going lunatic. Moving up and down again. There's no discharge in the world. 7, 6, 11, 5, 4, 17, 32 the day before.
So, as we said earlier in the episode, 28 Days Later, it's widely considered classic. It's a reaction to 9/11 in a lot of ways. Just a lot of movies made in 2002 through 2005. There was a lot of reactionary feelings, emotional processing happening there. It's really hitting on ideas of fear, isolation, survivalism in the face of terrorism. What's left of us once we've gone to war, sort of thing. And 28 Years Later, I do think, at least for my money, seems to be approaching some of those same ideas through that lens of post-COVID and post-Brexit context of 2025. World's a lot different. I'm even just acknowledging Trainspotting 2. That was right after Brexit, right? That came out like a year or so, I think.
I think it was a year before.
Was it a year before?
I think it was in the run-up to the actual referendum.
Yeah, okay, yes, thank you. Good, important clarification there. But there's a lot of ideas culturally that he was exploring there. So Adam, given you come to us from the UK, firstly, thank you for being here. I'm really curious about what your take is on, what is your read on how this film's different ideas have evolved with the cultural and political climate over the last 23 years?
Yeah, so I think 28 Days Later is a prophecy to what happened. And it's a really good sort of like fortune-telling movie now looking back on what's happened in those 23 years. But the way that 28 Years Later has brought it to screen is fantastic. I think the way that you've touched upon 28 Weeks Later, how they got to Paris and they quickly got rid of that theory, I think that's sort of a reaction to the COVID pandemic on how every country was for themselves. Everyone locked off their borders, dealt with things differently. There was no sort of, we're in it together. It was, we're on our own. We're dealing with this on our own, and screw you. Like if one country is suffering more than another, that's on you. That's on your protocols. Looking more from the Brexit way of things, I think in 2018, 2019, coming up to the referendum, Britain did have sort of a rage virus, as is shown in both 28 Days Later and 28 Years Later. The inherent racism that is involved in every Western society was really touched upon by certain politicians and honed in on to be able to sort of trigger that. And the whole way Brexit came about was, we'll take back our borders, we'll secure our borders, we'll keep these people out. And that sort of created that rage where people were like, yeah, we need to take control. And that is what happened. And we have sort of, as the UK as a whole, has isolated itself from the rest of Europe. And that is inherently what is happening in 28 Years Later. And there's a part of the movie where a NATO soldier from Sweden comes to the UK to sort of protect the people that are on land, but also to make sure that they're staying in their own country. And that is what we see in the modern day society. Europe still does hold out a helping hand when needed, but also says, you said you wanted to deal with things on your own. You are on your own.
Yeah.
And I think the way it's done in 28 Years Later is beautiful, because you've got this young Swedish soldier that is on land, that is empathetic with the Spike, the main character, and doesn't quite understand how, like, he's surviving on his own, doesn't understand what's going on outside of the world. And that is very similar. Like, if you go traveling to a random country, so I went to Bratislava not long after Brexit, and they didn't understand how the UK would not want to be part of Europe. Like, we're all together as a society. Europeans are very similar, very accepting of any race, gender, whatever you want to be in Europe, you can be that. Completely different to sort of America in certain ways. So for the UK to sort of negate that with one vote was crazy. And I think 28 Years Later really does capture that from somebody that's had to live through that. And that's why it's so touching to me. 28 Days Later sort of was a prophecy for what was to come. And I think the way that 28 Years Later also sort of touches upon some fun, in a fun way, of tragic British history, particularly with the last 3 minutes, the ending. I think it's great. And I think Danny Boyle and Alex Garland have been touched, obviously, by the political sphere in Britain. And this is their artistic way of getting it on screen and getting it across to a wider audience, because people won't know what it's like until you've lived in that. Same way that I had a basic understanding of, like, the American political system until I moved here, didn't understand how much it changes day-to-day living.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this movie does from a British stance.
Wow. Well said. Thank you so much for sharing all that. I think it provides a lot of very valuable context, certainly for us at the table, and hopefully for listeners as well. We basically can say, well, this is what we think it means based off of,
Sure.
I haven't even been to the UK. So,
Right.
it's getting that perspective is really valuable. And I'm kind of curious, like, what is your take on this idea that they're isolated and they're living more primitively than the rest of the world that seems to have moved on? I don't know if that stuck out to you at all.
It does, in a way that this sort of dream was sold to, like, our fishermen were sold, that they would control the British seas and they could go and catch whatever fish they wanted, and then realized that, the people have lied to them, the red tape. Europe has ownership of these waters, you can't go there, you're forbidden from going here. And that's kind of the same thing as the quarantine that's involved. Like, yeah, you're British, you can go up to this point, but that's it. You cross this point. Obviously, in 28 Years Later, that would result in death. But in real terms, that results in legal consequences. Life's changed completely. So for people that are trying to make a primitive living, what they were sold is completely different to what they've got.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure, and this is from my experience, most of the people that did vote for it have done the same thing that some people in America are doing and saying, this is not what I voted for.
when if you'd looked into it,
Right.
it's exactly what you voted.
Exactly what
for.
you voted for. Yeah. Yeah. In America, we did it twice, though.
Yeah. So half
of us did it twice.
Half of us did it twice. Yeah. But yeah, it's enough of us to make a difference.
I think there's a very specific context of Britain that we need to keep in mind here. But I do think there is at least worth acknowledging globally. There's been a lot of this like frustration with how things are, and a lot of politicians or non-politicians, frankly, have come in and utilized that to channel the anger.
Yeah.
To push their political careers forward. So I mean,
and something I hope is that from the vantage point of people overseas, in different countries, like who are looking at what's happening in the U.S. as like, why did they do this? Like a lot of us here are as dumbfounded and just perplexed by it as well, like how we got to this space. But and I'm sure in years later, we'll be able to examine the flaws of the structures and the systems that have led us to this place where this was inevitable, in many ways. But I'm sure there'll be a really great zombie movie about that too.
And hopefully it doesn't take us 28 years to reflect on that, Laurent. But anyway, I appreciate the context, but it also does speak. There's this weird sort of like cultural moment we're having globally related about just populism, sort of an anger, frustration at the system. People just voting for someone who tells them what they want to hear, only to be like, wait a second. Phil, I'll turn it to you. I mean, like, what is your take on how this film evolved with the political climate over the last 23 years?
Well, I can't expand upon anything better than Adam did. So much of it is about Brexit and isolationism. To your point, too, I mean, if you see what's happening with nationalism on a global scale, I mean, that is very much about hearkening back to. It's about regressing and going back to this mythical period that didn't really exist. I think to some extent, American audiences will respond to that with 28 years later. The whole and coupled with that, the whole idea of othering other people.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an analogy about racism and the infected and the uninfected, and the potential third rail or remedy to that with the child of the infected mother. There is so much there with regard to looking at empathy, demonizing other people. I think the Aaron Taylor Johnson at some point character is telling his son, like, the more you kill, the easier it'll get, which is very much about losing one's empathy and losing the idea of valuing other people. And then the second half of the movie is about really Spike coming to terms with the foibles of that. So, just a lot there.
Yeah. I agree. I think, and we can, we can get into that too, but, maybe a nice segue into the coming of age components, because there is I guess I didn't mention it. It would have been a little bit of a spoiler, but there is the interesting idea of the zombie non-infected baby that was birthed from an infected. And that's it's not totally new in zombie lore, but like how often it's been done well, I can't tell you if it's been. I can't name it.
It means something different in this.
Absolutely. Like Laurent, what is your take on sort of how this film has evolved with the?
Yeah, I think Adam kind of touched on it, but to reiterate, like, I think kind of like as a society, we're kind of no longer relying solely on the government to take care of us when we have global crises in this regard. I mean, you're even seeing it like in a more recent context, like with the No Kings protests that we've just seen all over the world, where it's kind of like we're realizing now that we are left to our own devices. And if we want to change something, it's going to come from within. It's not going to come from the powers that be. And I think that how we forge forward, in that regard is solely, like we have a real possibility right now to try and do things in a more humane way that works better for the broader, society. And I think that this movie, while not a direct, obviously commentary on this, but I'm able to, glean some some things that I'm feeling right now, with what I'm seeing around the world, that there is a pathway, for change and empathy and humanity to be restored into these places. And I think you see that with Spike's tension with his father, who's telling him the way things are, but Spike, even moment to moment, kind of rejecting his dad's advice because he's like, I just don't see it that way. I think that there is a way that we could extend some, humanity here. And we see that with the birth of that child. Like you would think immediately they all would just go and like, okay, we got to kill it and smash it to death, but instead, no, we got to preserve this. This is symbolic of something different that could come out of this, assuming that it does all go well and this isn't an infected baby that turns rabbit, that there is a beacon of hope. And I think that that's what's been different between this movie and the other ones, is that they're normally very nihilistic and kind of there isn't any hope. It's all despair. It's all like the things are just going to get worse until none of us are here. And this movie is actually creating a different pathway in that regard, saying that maybe there is hope here and maybe we can change things and maybe things can be different. And so when we're introduced to what we see in the final 3 minutes of this movie, you do see kind of those fringe kind of, those fringe, I guess, parts of society that are always going to continue to kind of fight for the past idea. That's always going to be there working against, change. As change is coming, there's also going to be people hearkening to those past forms of violence and injustice. And so I'm very curious to see how they explore that moving forward.
Yeah. Big question mark. I'm going to hit on that. Hold that thought. I want to pick that up here in a second. But I think the only thing I really want to add, and to add just a little more on, because I think I agree with everything you guys have said. Again, Adam, I think, providing the most meaningful context here. But I think both what Laron, you and Phil are hitting on, I like the idea that it's sort of, and maybe it's a little cliche, but it really works in the movie that the next generation who sees things differently offers the best path forward. It's almost like it feels hopeless for our generation, but if we can nurture these more empathetic tendencies versus the more violent impulses of survivalism that we saw in 28 Days Later, and then of course from the little island tribe in 28 Years Later, that perhaps there is a way for us to rebuild a meaningful society that is reintegrated, because we are all human. Removing borders and race, all of us, we're all people. We all have basic needs. And if we all work together, we can build a society in which we all live with some form of equality. And
it gives dignity to the death as well. Like that's what the Ralph Fiennes character really, I found very moving, that little piece, because it's like normally death is inevitable and it's bleak and it's despair, but he gives, a kind of, like a dignity to
every single life, the infected, non-infected, they all have value.
In a ceremonial kind of almost spiritual sort of way. I found that very an unexpected element to weave into this, because normally it's just hopelessness and despair. And there it's like, at least even in death, these people are given some, some regard.
Well, notice Ralph Fiennes is living with the infected. He doesn't kill Samson. He just figures out how to neutralize him, and when he comes around, and otherwise he's like, oh, they stay over there, I stay over here, we're all good. He's figured out how to adapt so he can live, at the very least, live alongside them, and then honors their life when they pass, by burning the bodies and putting the bones in the temple.
That entire sequence is so moving when he's talking about, when the Ralph Fiennes character is talking about these sockets and the eyes that they all had and what they've all seen and the memories that they've all seen. And I just thought those really poignant and really quite moving.
Yeah. A film that we didn't mention that I think actually does remind me a lot, Children of Men.
Yeah. It's got some similar energy.
Particularly the ending and how this new,
very similar,
this new baby that represents the future of society and the hope for society, which would be also a good recommend for earlier in the episode. Just adding that in.
I mean, just throwing it for people. Always, Children of Men. Always. Children Just recommend that always. Okay.
Or the Star Child in 2001.
Right. I want to bring it back to the end. By the way, did you guys all take a look at the Did you watch the credits or look up the credited actors who all show up at the end? By the way,
I mean, I did see. We mentioned Cillian Murphy as the EP, but
okay. Well, here's an important note. In the last 3 minutes of the film, we have Spike, and I'm sitting here thinking, oh, he's gonna like have his like I'm a man moment, protecting himself, with the bow, and then it's gonna cut to credits, and then it feels like a way to complete a great place to end it. We're like, all right, this is the arc. He's moving on to the next chapter. But then they're like, no, we gotta introduce Jimmy, not just. Hold on, Jimmy, played by Jack O'Connell.
Yes.
Speaking of sinners,
shows
up
in the 2 best movies of the year so far.
Exactly.
It's been a good year for him.
Did you notice he was one of the top billed actors in this movie? And I was like, wait, he's only in it for
how?
like 2 minutes. So he's playing Sir Jimmy Crystal. Okay, this is also with the upside down cross. He is at the beginning of the movie. We see the kids watching the Teletubbies at near the church. Jimmy's dad is little kid Jimmy survives the infected attack long enough to get to the church where his dad is some sort of minister, pastor, church spiritual leader who believes the rapture is occurring. It would have been a little more over the top if I hadn't lived through the last 10 years and seen people do things like that.
Yeah.
But he gets the cross that he's wearing. So you see this kid get away with his dad's cross, and I didn't notice it immediately, but he's wearing it at the end. He's got blonde hair. That's the same. So Jimmy Crystal, played by Jack O'Connell, is, I believe, the adult version of the kid we saw at the beginning. Okay. Here's the other thing about the other actors. I'm not going to go down the list of the other actors who are playing his other jumpsuit Teletubby friends. They're all named Jimmy.
Yeah.
Jimmy Inc., Jamia, Jimmy Jones, Jimmy Fox, Jimmy Shite. That one's funny.
God.
Jimmy Snake. Yeah, that's it. I think I got it. Also, Cillian Murphy in the first movie, named Jim. So I just want to throw this out there, though. This appears to be a cult of Jimmys, and there's a couple of other visual nods. You see Jimmy's name written on the side of a building at one point. I have to ask, Adam, I read some stuff online, and I'm just going to posit the question. Is there some context that, as Americans, we might be missing on this?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
So, and I'd encourage everyone here and everyone listening to go look it up in their own time. There was a very, very famous guy called Jimmy Savile, who was a children's TV presenter who did a program called Jim'll Fix It. And he was loved by everyone, cult following, as we see here. After he died, all his crimes of pedophilia, things like that, all came out. The way that I've perceived it, and I think Danny Boyle's also said about it, 28 Days Later happens in 2002, way before any of Jimmy's crimes in real life were ever found out. So the world is stopped in that moment. At that moment in time, in 2002, Jimmy Savile still had cult following. That is exactly how he dressed.
Oh, wow.
Jack O'Connell's hair he looks like Jimmy Savile, essentially.
Wow.
So the way that I've perceived it is, in the film, it's obvious that Jimmy Savile was never found out to be who he was. So he's still remembered as the last face of TV before it cut off entirely. So people remember who Jimmy Savile was. The kid who's grown up to be that guy will have watched Jim'll Fix It in 2002. So has idolized this guy, has dressed like him. All the people are a very similar age, so they probably like Jim'll Fix It. But the way I've taken it from Danny Boyle's point of view is British culture likes to forget things, instantly. So the way that he's touching upon Brexit and isolation, we easily forgot about the referendum. Within a couple of years, we've got new problems to think about. Jimmy Savile will never be talked about. It's like a taboo subject. So the fact it's now been brought up at the end of a movie, blown up in the UK. How on earth could he portray Jimmy Savile on screen? It'll be talked about in UK media for weeks to come. And that's great.
So it's radical in a way.
That is
Yeah,
awesome.
that is awesome.
Wow.
Pedophilia, holy cow.
It was the biggest scandal in UK media history. He was on the BBC, which is a government-owned broadcast.
people in the UK pay a TV license. I know that's not a thing here, but you pay to watch live TV. It's not like cable. You physically cannot watch TV without paying for it. You have people turning up at your doors. You get court dates if you don't pay for it. All of that type of crazy stuff.
Wow.
So the fact that he was on the BBC and it was getting covered up by BBC higher ups for, I think it was maybe even 2 decades. I'm not 100% au fait with everything that happened, but it was the biggest travesty ever. So the way that Jack O'Connell calls himself Sir Jimmy Crystal, it's like he'd been knighted. Yeah.
Oof.
So it's probably the biggest controversy, or one of, in British history, and Danny Boyle's put his own take on it. And then in saying that, that makes me think the next movie, the sequel, is that going to go down this crazy route that if you watch one episode of Jim Will Fix It, like it was this crazy TV show, childhood entertainment. That's obviously what Jack O'Connell's character is going to be, but now I am extremely interested to see how artistically they get around that without causing offense to the victims. The victims will still be 40s, 50s. Most of them will still be alive and still have to go through day to day remembering what this guy did to them. How is that going to be perceived?
Wow. I mean, that's a heavy
I knew
question.
none of that, and now that has even exploded my mind more about what they could delve into with these next films. So
my read, without any of that context, although now that you provide that, I think I'm leaning even more towards maybe this will be a way for them to explore the cult of personality and charismatic leaders who have followers.
Right.
That was my initial gut reading. I was like, especially when you get Jack O'Connell is very charismatic actor.
Because they feel so divorced from every other character that we've introduced that they have their own internal logic, their own kind of, there's a lot that's communicated in that brief little moment. We're like, who are these people? And what is their philosophies and point of view? Because they're definitely...
And Arrested in Time, too.
Yeah.
I mean, with the whole Teletubbies,
yes,
kind of referencing of the 1, 2.
Yes, exactly. And the color coordination.
Yeah, the colors, the Teletubby bit. Yeah, wasn't it bizarre when Boris Johnson was elected? Wasn't it bizarre when Donald Trump got elected? A reality TV. It felt like, oh, we were on this trajectory, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this crazy thing that feels so out of touch with the reality that we're actually living in sort of like takes over the narrative.
It's been normalized. Yeah.
And now it's been normalized. But like, I'm just thinking, makes me really excited, nervous, curious about the next chapter, if that's the direction they're going. I don't know.
Yeah.
Lauren, what was your take on the Sir Jimmy? I mean, just in general.
Yeah, I mean, well, it wasn't that because I had none of that context, but I was just curious because I just saw them as like fringe disruptors of society, and they were just, they'd created their own little silo or bubble of principles and values, and here he's being welcomed into something. I didn't know if they were going to be good or bad. It's kind of vague there at the end where it's like they're helping him, but what are they seeking from this kid? So with that context, I'm really curious what that will be. But it's all very fascinating and definitely seems like there's a lot to explore thematically with that. So yeah.
Phil, anything to add?
I think we've covered the waterfront, but now that I know about the Jimmy Savile stuff, I need to see it again.
Yeah, a different context.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, last thing I just want to touch on here, and we hit it on a lot in spoiler-free section, the spoiler-free section. So maybe I don't want to beat a dead horse, but the idea that this is a sequel doing something radically different. I just wanted to provide us a space if we had things to say in a spoilerish context. Like, how is this movie changing what we've become accustomed to seeing in sequels? It's not part 9 of a mega franchise. It's not a requel, legacy sequel. I guess it's kind of a legacy sequel, but like it's not doing things those typically do. There's no cast members from the original movie. How is this really changing what we should or could expect from other sequels and franchise films? Phil, I'll throw it to you.
Well, I think it can be promising that maybe existing IP doesn't have to, follow an expected trajectory. I couldn't help but notice when I did see this movie, there were trailers for remakes of War of the Roses and a remake of I Know What You Did Last Summer. And, we have Superman reboot coming up and Fantastic Four reboot coming up and Freaky Friday reboot coming up. And I mean, it's just like, when Hollywood seems to be really devoid of new ideas, it's cool to see that this can be existing IP and it still is new and interesting and exciting and different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. I didn't think about that, but yeah, pretty much every trailer
coming out,
every trailer was some other existing IP. Adam, what's your take on this? Like, I mean, should we expect more from our sequels?
I think with 28 years later, it's all down to Danny Boyle and Alex Garland. I think they're not afraid to take risks, and with all these sequels, reboots, and things, people are playing it safe, and I get that. You need to get the paycheck that keeps the movie industry rolling. This is the sequel that we needed, and hopefully it inspires other filmmakers to take that risk. We're in a climate where to make a change, for better or for worse, people need to feel empowered to speak through art or speak in whatever way they need or see fit. And I think Danny Boyle has made some very creative decisions that are going to be very divisive, but they'll get people speaking. And that's what I think from an already made IP is what we need to do. Take a bit more risks rather than, like you say, I saw all the same trailers, nothing inspired me. I'm excited to see Superman, sure, because I grew up with that as a superhero, but is there going to be anything different? I highly doubt it.
Yeah.
Whereas this was the first sequel I've seen in a long time where I've walked out with some really poignant things that I need to think about rather than just entertaining slop, which a lot of things have been.
Yeah. I've not to diminish the artistic work that goes into movies, but I've been using the word slop a lot more on it. No, for real. Like anytime, like I mean, the Marvel movies, it sounds like you're always trashing them. They're the low hanging fruit, but it's like, yeah, it's not that it's bad. It's just it's all predictable. It's all made by committee. It's all. I mean, there's some exceptions. We did like Thunderbolts, but typically, and there's also so much of it. It just feels like slop. LeRon, what do you think? How is this changing what we become accustomed to, and maybe what should we do to expect more?
Well, I like your question is should we expect more from sequels? And I don't know if you're referring to the audience or if I say as the audience members, yes, we should expect more from storytelling. But I think that to Adam's point, we're going to get a lot of the same, but it doesn't sound like that has to be the path. Again, it's incumbent upon us, not just as society to change the world, but also to change the landscape of what we want and what we're hungry for and eager for as viewers, going to movies. And I think if we support films like this, if this has a good showing, you know what I mean? Like then that will incentivize people to take more risks when it comes to existing IP and not to just play the hits and lean on nostalgia, as the only way to get butts and seats. Because this will be divisive, but I think it's also going to create its own a new fan base for this franchise. And so especially if they stick the landing with the next two movies, so so I expect to see some changes. I think that all change is kind of slow, but when filmmakers are given the freedom and the space to take some creative risks and have them pay off, then we're all better for it.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. It is incumbent on the audience. Because at the end of the day, I think Adam raises a valid point. This is still, in order for us to keep making movies, they have to make money. And for better or for worse, audiences don't always like change. So there has to be a fine balance between, it's familiar, but also we want to say it's familiar, but it's a new take on the familiar thing.
Yeah.
Good news, though. This actually just posted since we have been recording, and it's the box office. So 28 years later at domestic U.S. box office, scares up $30 million, which is a huge debut. I think it's one of the higher rated horror debuts. And I think I read it's got another $30 million coming in globally. So right there in opening weekends, recouping its production budget.
It's good.
Which is a great start. I'm really curious how word of mouth is going to go, because at this table, it sounds like we're all pretty bought in whole hog. But I did have a couple friends text me when I said I think this is one of the best things this year. They said, interesting. And it was the response I got back. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Did not feel the same way. So the good news is, though, at least this entry seems like it's set up for some pretty significant financial success. And that's encouraging and exciting, because you always hope that the suits at the top say, well, what was it about that one that people showed up for versus these other 10 crappy ones that people didn't like or didn't show up for?
Yeah.
So, yes, it is ultimately incumbent on the audience. So far, it looks like the audience is speaking.
And it obviously has a little bit longer to go because the other ones were made for such smaller budget.
Yeah.
But that being said, it's still promising that.
Well, and even a $60 million, which is nothing to sneeze at, but even by Hollywood studio standards, is pretty low budget.
Pretty low.
Rather than a Marvel film that's usually $200-300 million. Well, I think we've adequately hit on quite a bit with this movie. Anything else you guys want to say about 28 years later before we wrap up?
Go see it. Go see it again.
Go see it again.
Go see it again.
Yeah.
Let's get those numbers up.
Yeah, seriously.
We need better zombie movies. Yeah.
Yes, really.
I would just throw in, because we didn't talk about performances so much, but great performances. I thought Jodie Comer was awesome.
Yeah.
Ralph Fiennes is always incredible. And is it Alfie Williams?
Alfie Williams, yeah.
What an incredible, I think that he's 14, I read, or was 14 when they did the
Held
film.
his own. He carried
Oh my
that
gosh,
movie,
yeah.
Same year that, I forget the name of the kid who was in adolescence, but just some incredible child actors. He really was commanding.
I agree. Yeah.
Also noting adolescence, got to throw that into some recommendations too, because that series is spectacular.
Oh my gosh,
filmmaking craft and emotion. Yeah, just tremendous British production as well. Been recommending that one a lot.
And speaking of Ralph Fiennes, we knew he was in this movie from the trailers, and I was like, as we got to about the hour and a half, I was like, is he going to be just a cameo in this?
I thought, yeah.
I was like, I know we're teasing him in the background with the fire and the smoke, but is that all it's going to be? And then while he's not in the movie for a substantial amount of time, I do think they have a very poignant and extended, sequence with him that definitely makes that character and his presence in this universe they're creating very, very significant. And so, I loved the casting across the board in this. I think of all the movies, all three of these movies, again, we mentioned the first one has some well-drawn characters, but I think this is the most three-dimensional and fleshed out of the characterizations from all three movies. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also just how eloquently the characterizations tie so closely to the themes that they're exploring too.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like a tapestry. It's really well done. Yeah. Man, yeah, nothing else to say other than can't wait for the next one coming in January. Go see this one so we can get the third one, because I really want to see 2 more of these. And I'm just so glad to see Danny Boyle back. Gosh, I didn't realize how much I'd missed him until I was watching this movie. I think the first 15 minutes, I was like, here we go. Danny Boyle is so back, just with the editing, the music that he was cutting to the historical or the footage of like the old productions with the battles and stuff. I was like, man, he's swinging for the fences out the gate, and I just love to see the bold filmmaking. So, sounds like this movie has our highest recommendations. This has been a great time, guys. Thanks for taking time out of your Sunday. It's big Game 7 day for Oklahoma listeners, and I guess also Indiana listeners or whoever watches the NBA. So hopefully, at this table, we're all hoping for a Thunder win tonight. Can't wait to listen to this in 2 days when it goes live. Phil, hey, thanks so much for joining us today. Where can people keep up with you and your work online?
Oklahoma Gazette, okgazette.com. And I also have a website I haven't been writing for recently, but I need to start up again, and that's cuttingtothechase.com.
Very cool. Check his reviews out. Really fast, fun, memorable. Adam, where can people follow you online?
Yeah, so more social media based. TikTok is my main platform. So Adam Reviews Film on there, and Letterboxd if you have it. Same username.
His Letterboxd reviews crushing it, dude.
I will
love it. Yeah, we're all big Letterboxd fans here. LeRon Chapman, where can people follow you?
Yeah, speaking of Letterboxd, my handle is black_Senna_man for my little mini Bite Size Reviews. If you want to check me out on there, I review very regularly. And then for longer form reviews, I have a film column on the Cinematropolis, Real Insights with LaRon Chapman.
And I want to call this out because things got a little busy there with all the Dead Center and whatnot. Your last Real Insights column was on Magazine Dreams, and I want to call that out, which is another movie that I know we had a lot of complicated feelings about. Jonathan Majors. On this show, we were in the Team Majors camp so hard. I mean, literally, there was 2 reviews, like for Creed 3 and even the Ant-Man Quantumania.
Yeah, he had the trajectory of a very, very promising career, and then hindered by personal life stuff. And but then I did still kind of begrudgingly go see this movie because I was so all so fascinated to see it beforehand, and I was surprised by just how moving and compelling of a film it was, that it stuck with me in a very visceral way, that I do think it's still worth seeing, and I kind of explore the themes and why I think it's still worth seeing despite him. Because I think the message in the movie is also commenting on the kind of person that he is.
Yeah.
So
super interesting. I promise you, once I got through June, it was like number 1 on my watch list. So I'm excited to check it out. Listeners, of course, you can find me on all the social media channels, Letterboxd, Instagram, mostly at C Masters Talk. That's letter C Masters Talk. Or just head on over to cinematropolis.com. That's where most of my movie thoughts are at. Well, LaRon, they've done it to us again. The studios. And the audiences keep showing up. They've done it again. And the ones who listen to our podcast, because I wouldn't just do this lightly, but the world has demanded that we review another Jurassic World movie with Jurassic World Rebirth. So listeners, I will say of the Jurassic Worlds, this one seems the most promising-ish. He's got Mahershala. He's got to get paid while he's waiting for that Blade script.
And Jonathan Bailey and
Gareth Edwards.
Maybe. So those names I care a little bit more about. But yeah, we'll see. But yeah, the Jurassic World franchise has been a no-go for me.
No-go.
First one was fine. Second one was less than fine. Third one was abysmal for me.
We talked about The Locust. You can listen to that one, where it was literally just us raging, and then our friend Brock Lay was sitting here being like, my kids liked it, so I kind of enjoyed it.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's right, ladies and gentlemen. Catch us in our next episode here in 2 weeks when we will be reviewing Jurassic World Rebirth. Until next time.